The following podcast is brought to you by the Crime Prevention 101 Safety Store, your one-stop shop for personal safety. Come by and browse at crimeprevention101.com.
Welcome to Crime Prevention 101, the podcast with an optimistic perspective on a sober subject. The views and ideas expressed on this program are strictly those of the guests and do not necessarily reflect the views and ideas held by the host, associate participants, or sponsors. Now, here's your host, Crime Prevention Specialist Susan Bartlestone.
Oh my. In May of 2011, a 90-year-old man testified before the U.S. Senate Special Committee on Aging at their hearings on elder abuse. And he told how his stepson had withheld food and medicine from him and his wife, had interfered with their finances, yelled, threatened, bullied them, to the point where they were effectively prisoners in their own home, trapped, terrified, and frustrated. And he suffered for years because he couldn't find the courage to speak up. What was so striking for me, though, is that the man testifying was beloved actor Mickey Rooney, one of Hollywood's top stars, and he's still well respected even today. And Mickey isn't alone. The National Center on Elder Abuse estimates that possibly up to 3 million older Americans are victims of physical, psychological, sexual, financial, or other forms of abuse and neglect every year, especially because cases don't always get reported. And many of the victims are too mentally impaired or physically impaired, frail, and unable to speak up for themselves, like Mickey Rooney was finally able to do. This is Susan Bartlestone, coming to you from what I like to call the Universal Dojo, the place that we gather to learn about safety. We're right here in New York City, where the weather is heating up, but we are always cool. And as always, my partner in crime prevention, Lydia Perez, the tech whiz, is here with me. Hey, Lydia.
Hey, everyone. Happy Easter. Welcome to the podcast.
Now, Lydia, we have a very sober subject to talk about today, but it's a very necessary one, right?
Yeah, 100%.
And the reason I chose this topic is because June 15th is World Elder Abuse Day. So I'm going to revisit an interview that I did a few years ago, my former Crime Prevention 101 radio show, with a woman who at that time was the Director of Public Awareness Activities for the National Center Against Elder Abuse. Her name is Sharon Merriman Nye, and we had a very frank talk about what can be done about this crime against humanity, because that's what I consider it. It is like a war crime.
Agreed, 100%.
Now, this particular subject really hits home for me, since at the time that I did the interview, my family and I had just put my elderly mother, she was in her 90s, and she had Alzheimer's, and there was nothing else we could do. We put her into a nursing home, a skilled nursing facility, and believe me, we agonized over this decision for months because we knew how vulnerable she would have been to abuse, both outside and inside the facility. And then I also had to watch my dad grow more and more feeble as he aged as well. And I had to step in to make sure that he was taken care of. And he agreed to go into an assisted living facility, which he chose himself, which really helped, and where I could make sure that he lived with dignity to the very end. And I know you've had your own issues with this as well, Lydia.
Yes, I have. My mother passed away from dementia, Lewy body dementia to be exact, on June 26, 2022, the day after my birthday. So yeah. It's still raw.
And you cared for her yourself for years.
For 11 years. I was fortunate enough eventually after a few years of trying to find a good home health agency to help with the situation, because I was working full time and I'm also taking care of my sister who happens to be handicapped as well. So I ended up finding 2 very beautiful home aides that have been with me, and they're more like family now for 7 years.
That's wonderful. And that's like the best that it can be. And you're there to supervise and make sure that everything is being done properly. And this is so critical, because sometimes families think because they have a home health aide, they don't need to check in, especially if they don't live right around where where the parent is, and that's one of the ways that abuse happens. And
Exactly.
I went onto the internet and I did a little bit of a search, and there were a number of famous people other than Mickey Rooney where there was suspicion of this kind of abuse. Stan Lee, we love our hero. Stan Lee, there's controversy about him with his manager. They're fighting between the manager and the daughter. Nichelle Nichols from Star Trek.
That was surprising. I had no idea. That's
Lieutenant
Uhura.
Right?
Yeah, that was surprising to me.
Harper Lee, there was allegations of that. Casey Kasem, DJ Casey Kasem, we loved him, right?
Yeah, I heard about him. I heard about that particular one, yeah.
There were all sorts of allegations, and you know that Casey Kasem's daughter, Kerry, she founded Kasem Cares to advocate for elder abuse protections. So she clearly suspected or felt something was wrong there. Brooke Astor, one of the richest women in America, there was lawsuits. Barbara Walters, there were rumors about Mary Tyler Moore, Richard Pryor. I mean,
the list goes on. Yeah.
Right? So this is a problem that we all need to be aware of. And what better time than World Elder Abuse Day?
Agreed. If you know anyone who might benefit from this show, please, we urge you to share it with them.
Before we go to the interview, I've got an important announcement, so don't go anywhere. I've got some significant information coming up for you. And of course, there's safety tips coming up at the end of the show. We don't want you to miss this.
No, we do not. So stay tuned.
If you're feeling insecure or apprehensive about your safety in the world today, and you should be, if you're looking for the best pepper spray, the best tasers, or alarms, or innovative personal safety devices, if you're looking for ebooks to help you heal from trauma, to deal with bullies, to learn self-defense, or whatever concerns you, the Safety Store is where nationally recognized crime prevention specialist Susan Bartlestone has curated the products she recommends and uses herself. Tons of free safety advice is available if you need immediate help. And while you're there, be sure to get your free copy of Susan's guide, Keeping Yourself Safe, All-Time Top Tips. That's the Crime Prevention 101 Safety Store at crimeprevention101.com.
Now, let's go to my previously recorded interview with Sharon Merriman-Nye from the National Center Against Elder Abuse and learn more about this topic.
The following program is being brought to you on the Voice America Variety Channel.
Now let's meet Sharon Merriman-Nye. I think I have to make sure I got that right. Director of Public Awareness Activities for the National Center on Elder Abuse. Hi, Sharon. Welcome.
Thank you for having me on. How are you?
I'm good. Now, did I pronounce your name right? Merriman-Nye?
Actually, it's Nye.
Nye, Merriman-Nye. Okay. Well, Sharon, I have to tell you, this is a subject that is very close to me because recently, a couple of months ago, I had to put my mom into an assisted living facility for Alzheimer's patients. And, you know, we just agonized so much. And believe me, the question of elder abuse is very, very much on my mind. So could you just give us a little background? What exactly constitutes elder abuse?
Well, when we talk about elder abuse, we're talking about a number of different things that could go on. We may be talking about physical abuse. We might be talking about neglect or self-neglect, financial exploitation, and also, unfortunately, sexual abuse. And these things can happen in a community setting, you know, where individuals are still living in their own homes or with family members. It can happen in a nursing home or an assisted living facility as well. Mm-hmm. So it really does cover a number of different kinds of things that can happen. And unfortunately, in many instances, it's happening at the hands of people who are known and trusted by the older individual.
I was just talking at the top of the show. Someone sent me something about Mickey Rooney, the actor, being a victim and testifying at before the Special Committee on Elder Abuse. It's just shocking to me.
It really is. Mickey Rooney, as we all know, he was a very famous person. He still is a very famous person. And he actually grew up in the eyes of many of our older individuals today. And I think because of that, what happened to Mr. Rooney is that he was allegedly financially exploited and also neglected and emotionally, I think, abused. And he went before Congress and talked about these things. And it really empowered a lot of older people and a lot of family members to come forward, because one of the greatest problems with elder abuse is that it is very, very much in the shadows.
What is your estimate? How big how many people? I think I've heard millions, but
we do estimate that somewhere between 750,000 to 3.5 million individuals in the United States alone have been victimized in some way. And there are many experts that think that that's an underreporting, because traditionally very few individuals come forward to report. At one point we thought maybe 1 in every 6 individual cases were reported, but there was a recent study in New York State that suggests it may be far fewer cases that ever come to light.
Really? So that it might even be more than 3.5 million?
Yes. And it's important to remember, too, that folks can be abused in more than one way at the same time. For instance, greed quite often drives financial exploitation, but in order to get to that, to being able to have access to an individual's money, there may be threats, there may be physical harm, there may be, the caregiver or other family member may neglect the older person's needs in order to get to their money. So, it's a very tangled sort of situation in many cases.
Yeah, and I know, like, for example, my mom, who has Alzheimer's, she's pretty delusional. And she says things that we know are not true. And we wouldn't even be sure if she was telling us the truth if she said somebody was doing something to her, because she does say things. She thinks people were after her, things like that. I think that's another part of the problem, that you really don't know what to believe from these people sometimes.
I think you're right. And, we do know that actually people with dementia are at very high risk for being mistreated. And what we always say is that, you want to listen to the person's story and check it out. But you also, in a case such as that, you want to look for other types of symptoms or evidence, or maybe even something like a change in that person's behavior, maybe an indicator that something's not right. And even if someone is delusional or has dementia, you still want to follow through and check it out. You want to go through and hear the stories. I was recently at a conference where people were talking about elder sexual abuse, and it's something that's so foreign, and that is a relatively rare type of elder mistreatment. But you do see that in those kinds of cases that sometimes people are not believed, and they should always be believed, and there should always be, a serious accounting of the story and a serious attempt to do an examination and find out what really happened. It's very challenging.
Yes, indeed, because, I'm really, I tell you, we so agonized over this just because I was aware, we didn't want her away from us, but also I was aware of the potential, and it's just terrifying me. It really is. And I like to know exactly what I should look for. And talk a little bit also about the National Center on Elder Abuse and the resources that you provide for people like me, because I thought your site was really terrific.
Well, thank you. The National Center on Elder Abuse is a grant-funded program by the U.S. Administration on Aging, and we serve as a resource center for the professionals who work in very different roles that deal with elder abuse prevention and awareness, such as adult protective services or ombudsmen or healthcare folks, people working in aging services and banking services and so on and so forth. But we also serve to provide information for the public, for individuals like yourself, for older people, and any concerned individual who wants to know more about the issue can come to our website and get a sense of the kinds of things that we're talking about when we talk about elder abuse. and strategies for preventing and raising awareness. And I believe that raising awareness is the most important piece of this puzzle. But for someone like yourself, the fact that you are aware of the potential for mistreatment is very important. And that means that your eyes are open, your ears are open, you're going to be attentive to the needs of your mother, even though she's in a facility. That's really important. One of the things that we do know, and I keep saying one of the things that we do know, because really we do need a great deal more research on many aspects of elder abuse, including risk factors and including what strategies work and what interventions work. But one of the things that we have learned is that, as I mentioned before, folks with dementia are at increased risk. And the other thing is people who are isolated are at increased risk. And sometimes you can be isolated even though you're in a facility, because you may be cut off from, the greater community, your family, friends, what have you. So it's very important for people to remain as engaged as long as they can be, for the family members or the concerned others to be able to come in and have an active voice and help to advocate for the needs of that older person, and to just keep their eyes and ears open and to be in good communication with the staff of the facility so that should there be changes, should you have a concern, you'll know that you want to go and talk about that. You'll know that you want to be aware of anything that might be happening in your mother's life.
Exactly. And you have some excellent tip sheets on the website about what to look for. And if someone suspects that someone is being abused, what should they do if they suspect that it's occurring? What should they do?
Well, I think if you suspect that it's occurring, if it's an individual, if it's not an emergency situation, you would want to call Adult Protective Services. You may want to ask the older person some questions before you do that, but certainly we encourage everyone to contact Adult Protective Services if they suspect mistreatment. But if that person if that's like an emergency situation or someone's in immediate harm, contact the police, dial 911, whether they're in a facility or in the community or wherever.
Now, I think I saw, Sharon, I think I saw, let me just back up a little bit now. We'll get to that. We'll talk about what to do if it's immediate, but I think I saw that there was a state-by-state listing of the Adult Protective Services agencies on your, is it on your website? Did I see it?
Yes. Yes. Unfortunately, unfortunately, elder abuse doesn't have a national hotline per se. Every state has its own system for dealing with these kinds of issues. And so we do have a listing. If you go to our website and you look at our state resource page, you can click on a state name, and that'll bring up the phone numbers for reporting mistreatment in that state, websites, and so on. Each state does deal with it differently. But if you're not able to use the Internet, we do have a phone number that can be used. It's the Elder Care Locator number. And this is also a service of the Administration on Aging, and they provide phone numbers not only for Adult Protective Services, but for other services that may be very helpful in allowing an older individual to have independence and to stay in the community and to help families to provide care. And that Elder Care Locator number is 1-800-677-1116. It's not a hotline, but it is an information and referral line.
Okay, give it again, 1-800-677-1116. 1116, and that's the locator, Elder Care Locator. And give out your website also.
It's on the World Wide Web, ncea.aoa.gov.
Okay, and I'm going to post a link to it on my blog, Crime Prevention 101. And one other important question, can you report suspected elder abuse anonymously? Because I know a lot of times you don't want to be the one to turn in the family member who you think is abusing another family member, or, you might be afraid to report abuses, because the person could be dangerous if they know that you reported. Can it be done anonymously?
I believe that you can report anonymously in most states. However, the intake worker, when you call in, would always like to have contact information, and those reports are kept confidential. So even if you do provide your information, you can be sure that they will not be divulging who called.
Terrific.
When people are calling in, we do want to have as much information as possible about the specific situation, where the individual is, what's happening, how old that person might be, whether they have disabilities, what kind of a living environment, and so on and so forth.
All right, terrific, because I think that is a lot that, there are people that just don't want to start trouble in the family or could be afraid to report it, and I think it's good to know that they might have that option. And Sharon, I don't want to forget what you said. If you see immediate abuse and someone's in danger, call the police.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Report it right away, and don't wait. All right. Well, thank you, Sharon, for being with me. For more resources, I want you to check out and information. Check out their website. It's ncea.aoa.gov.
You're listening to Crime Prevention 101 with Susan Bartlestone. Susan would like to remind you that no absolutes exist in a crime scenario, and no advice can possibly address every variable. Each situation should be evaluated individually and responded to in the way you instinctively judge best. It's Susan's aim on this podcast to provide you with the information and options that will help you make that instinctive assessment quickly and safely. However, sometimes nothing can be done to prevent a bad outcome. And if you're already a survivor of the kind of crime we're talking about on the show today, or any other crime for that matter, please remember that there are no right or wrong responses in a criminal encounter, and nothing that happened to you was your fault. Even if you think you used bad judgment in the situation and left yourself vulnerable, that's never an excuse for a crime or violence. So please, call yourself a survivor and not a victim. And understand that with time, distance, and the proper professional help, you can put what happened into perspective and get on with your life. Now, back to Crime Prevention 101.
And we're back. Don't forget, as always, you can follow the show on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. You can click on that subscribe button on the lower right corner of our YouTube page because those clicks help us and we thank you for them. So don't forget to click that bell so you'll know when a new episode drops. And be sure to check out the Crime Prevention 101 website for safety tips and resources. And while you're there, get Susan's free safety guide, Keeping Yourself Safe, All-Time Top Tips. It's a terrific guide with a lot of tips, probably some you've never even seen before.
That's right, Lydia. Wow, what did you think about that interview? Very sobering, wasn't it?
Yes, it's very sobering, brings back memories, causes emotions to arise. But yeah, it's very sobering. I thought one of the best parts was the signs of elderly abuse that she went over with, which we're going to share on our podcast right now.
Yeah, let's review those signs that you should be looking for of elder abuse, particularly if you suspect that the person has dementia. Because when you think that the person has dementia, the tendency is not to believe them. And I know from my mother, she would say things that we know definitely didn't happen. So if you've got an elderly parent that's complaining to you that a caregiver did this and did that, and the caregiver is going to deny it, don't just dismiss it. Very important.
Agreed.
All right,
Agreed.
What to look for.
That's right. So some of these signs are physical abuse, the use of force to threaten or physically injure a vulnerable person. There's emotional abuse, verbal attacks, threats, rejection, isolation, or belittling acts that cause or could cause mental anguish, even pain or distress. There's sexual abuse, and that is sexual contact that is forced physically or obtained through trickery or threats, or otherwise coerced upon a vulnerable person, particularly someone who is unable to grant consent.
Let me just break in here for a second. This is also particularly something that is not believed. When an elderly person tells you that someone is sexually abusing them for whatever reason, the kids or the caregivers are not believing it. listen when they talk about that. It's usually not a lie. It's usually not an illusion or a delusion.
Yes. Another sign is financial exploitation, theft, fraud, misuse of funds, neglecting to pay bills, and use of subtle or obvious influence to gain control over an older person's money or property. And that's a big thing. I've heard cases myself where the premise was, financial. That was where the abuse started.
Yeah, unfortunately, yes. The kids want their money.
Yeah.
Not so good.
I know. Another sign is neglect, failure or refusal by a caretaker to provide for a vulnerable person's personal safety, physical or emotional needs. So, for example, denying food or medication, not keeping the person and or the person's home clean, which is a big thing. You see that around a lot.
Absolutely. And, this reminds me of a story that my brother once told me, that he had an elderly neighbor lived across the street, and the neighbor was living on his own, but he was just getting very frail. And the neighbor had a son, but the son was clearly neglecting him, wasn't coming by, and there was no food. The house was a mess, and my brother would come over and help him clean and help him get food, take him to get to the store and everything, because his relative just absolutely outright abandoned, neglected him, wouldn't help out. And my brother really called quite often to say, listen, your father needs help. You got to get there. There's something broken in his house. It's a horrible situation. And the poor guy really was too frail to stand up for himself at that point.
And that's not good. Another sign is abandonment, outright desertion of a frail or vulnerable person by a relative or a caretaker, which that's what you just commented on, Susan.
I know another example of this too. I live in an apartment building, and there was a woman here that I knew over the years, and she did have dementia. She had some kind of dementia. I don't know what it was. And she would be wandering the hall. She would get lost. She couldn't find her way, and security was always having to pick her up and take her back. And she had 2 kids, none of them who were in New York, and they were told that they needed to get her an aid. They just didn't want to be bothered because they didn't want to spend the money. And that's outright desertion, abandonment by a relative or caretaker.
Yeah. And lastly, self-neglect, perhaps due to diminished physical and or mental capacity, which can lead to self-harm or endangerment for the person.
And a lot of times that happens when there is no relative. Sometimes there's no children, the spouse has died, they are people on their own. And a lot of people I know where I live also have this problem. And then you see them start to walk around with dirty clothes, and they're unkempt. They're not taking their medication. They're having to run to the hospital. Self-neglect also. Keep an eye out for that if you are a neighbor or a friend of these people.
You know what surprises me the most, just in going over this, that some of these things just don't seem obvious to people. Some people, it's obvious. You can see it clear as day. Hey, there's something happening with this individual. And some people are just walking around oblivious to it. So I think that's the most surprising for me, because, we should look after each other.
Absolutely. So, and that's what I want to do next, Lydia. Let's give some tips about spotting these signs. And if you spot it, what you can do about it. And sometimes it's just as simple as making a phone call.
Yeah, it truly is. So here are 5 tips for keeping our older adults safe. Vigilance, prevention. Vigilance equals prevention. Keep in frequent contact with your older relatives or older friends and neighbors. Ask questions. Listen. Take notes. Call your state's adult protective service agencies for guidance. You'll get all the information there. Right, Susan?
Absolutely. And do keep a note, keep a journal. On March 5th, I saw that this person didn't have food. On March 25th, I saw that she had a bruise on her head, and we had to take her to a doctor. When you contact your state's agencies, you can tell them the list, and that will help them determine that this person needs looking after.
Yeah, agreed. The second sign is be alert for the signs of abuse or neglect. Watch particularly for repeated, unexplained bruises, sores, unkept appearance, bills not getting paid, noticeable weight loss, depression, not taking medication, or anything else that strikes you as suspicious or dangerous.
Absolutely, and write those things down as well. And this is easy to do. This is a friend or a neighbor that you might just normally have come across. Just make note of this. Don't just walk on by.
That's true. And it goes right into the next tip, which is take action. Alert uninvolved family members who may not be aware of the situation or report suspected mistreatment to your local adult protective services agencies and law enforcement. Most reporting could be done anonymously, so there's nothing to worry about, so to speak.
Yes, that's extremely important. You don't necessarily need to get involved. And sometimes the family doesn't mean to neglect the person. Sometimes they don't care, but many times they just are involved with their own life.
Agreed.
And if you know the family members and you can call them, or even if you can just give that information to the adult protective services people that you contact or your state agency, there's so much information where you could get guidance on this.
So true. So keep monitoring. Continue to speak out if you continue to see signs of abuse. Even if the situation has been investigated, keep monitoring it because sadly, these cases often slip through the cracks.
We know that, absolutely. And it's horrendous, but they do.
Yeah. And lastly, the last tip, the most important one of all, call 911. If you believe someone is in a life-threatening situation, contact your local police immediately and ask them to provide a wellness check.
That is just so important. That is absolutely so important. And they will come and they will take a look and see if the person's okay. And then they will report what they find to the proper social service agency. So again, I believe that a lot of this can be done anonymously. You don't necessarily have to get your name, get involved with it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we have some resources for you. That you can definitely reach out and learn more about this, or if you're concerned, you can definitely speak out. The first one that we want to share with you is contact the National Center on Elderly Abuse, which has a tremendous amount of helpful information on it. You can go to ncea.acl.gov or call their number at 302-831-3525. There's also the International Network for the Prevention of Elderly Abuse. That is INPEA.net. You can reach them at 1-800-222-2225. That's an easy number to remember. 1-800-222-2225. For information on World Elderly Abuse Awareness Day, you can visit the National Center on Elderly Abuse website. Again, it's ncea.acl.gov/weaad.aspx. And our famous tip sheets. You'll always find them at crimeprevention101.com website under the safety tips page. And this topic is elderly abuse. So you'll be able to find one tip that's a good resource that you can look at. It's called Elderly Abuse. If it happened to me, it can happen to anyone under the Elderly Abuse tab. Also, don't forget to keep an eye out for the Road to Recovery Life After Trauma Healing Journal, which I hear is coming out soon to the Crime Prevention 101 store. Right, Susan?
Right. Absolutely. Now, don't worry if you didn't get these links and these numbers. They're going to be all in the show notes on the YouTube channel. You can just click on them. All the tips that we gave on the show today are contained in that tip sheet that's on the Crime Prevention 101 safety tip pages. We're going to be doing more shows like this over the coming year, so keep your eyes peeled for that. We're going to do more healing shows. Please also continue to send me the comments and the topics that you think you'd like to hear about and resources that will be meaningful to your safety and quality of life, and we're going to try to do it.
Yes, and don't forget, you can always DM Susan with questions you may have about your own personal safety issues on any of our social media sites, or you know what, go old school and just email her directly at solutions@crimeprevention101.com.
Absolutely. So until we meet again, as we say here in the Universal Dojo, It'd be a crime not to listen.
So stay tuned and stay safe.